Pat Rabitte, Minister for Communications, Energy and Natural Resources with responsibility for RTE, asked the Broadcast Authority of Ireland to institute an inquiry into RTE's defamation of the priest Fr Reynold and the handling of the case by RTE. RTE had previously indicated there would be little or no accountability for what had occurred. A spokesperson said in dismissing suggestions there would have to be resignations. Rolled heads can't learn anything. Tonight we discuss the case, the scale of RTE's culpability, the heads that might roll, and the significance of this for the national broadcaster. We invited RTE to participate in the programme tonight, and I myself asked the RTE Director General, Noel Curran, to take part. However, nobody from RTE has agreed to come on the programme. However, with us are Patsy McGarry, Religious Affairs Correspondent of the Irish Times, Breda O'Brien, a columnist with the Irish Times, John Garney, a Jesuit priest and director of the Irish Jesuit Mission Office, and Senator John Wilson, who's a senator who previously edited the Leinster Express and the Offaly Express. If you'd like to comment on the programme, you can text us at 53131 and play tonight before a comment. Send us a tweet at #B or email us at tonight@tv3.ie. Before we start, I just want to say that I mentioned this issue of the defamation of Fr Reynold on the programme on Thursday night in the paper section, and my comments have since been criticised because I expressed admiration for the journalists involved in the primetime investigation programme, and I think the criticism probably is justified in that my remarks expressed instinctively a solidarity with the reporter rather than first acknowledging the terrible harm done to the priest involved. I did go on, of course, to say that it would be shameful if the reporter Aoife Kavanagh were scapegoated and that many other people in RTE had responsibility for what happened. We have on the line the solicitor who acted for Fr Reynold in this case, Robert Dorr. He's in Scotland and can't be with us in the studio this evening. Robert, I assume that you've heard of Pat Rabitte's announcement of an inquiry by the Broadcast Authority of Ireland into this whole matter. Yeah, I heard about that today. Obviously, I'm out of the country at the moment, but I got a text message about it. And I suppose it's welcome. In reading through the papers, Robert, the thing that has struck me quite forcibly is not just the way that RTE handled the whole matter prior to the broadcast, the defamatory broadcast, but that the way they handled the dealings with you on behalf of Fr Reynold afterwards.
Well, I think RTE behaved quite appallingly up until they realised that they were wrong. And once the paternity test results became clear, I think then that they behaved very responsibly after that. But up until that point, they repeatedly insisted that they would stand over every allegation that they made against Father Kevin, which was astonishing.
Well, actually, from the papers that I've read this evening, I think that they behaved badly even after the paternity test results became available, because they were aware that the paternity test results, they were aware on a Friday afternoon that the paternity test results had shown that Fr Reynold was not or could not have been the father of the child in question, and they didn't act immediately to let Fr Reynold and you know of this outcome, and you didn't find out till 4 days later.
No, that was disappointing, and it was actually, I think, a leak from RTE to an Irish independent journalist. That's how we found out about it. That was disappointing. But no, in fairness to RTE, when it did become evident that the test was, that Father Reynolds could not have been the father, I think that once that awareness sunk in, that they did behave responsibly thereafter. But up until then, I would be very critical of the manner in which they dealt with matters.
One of the issues that I'm curious about in relation to all this is whether Fr Reynolds offered to do a paternity test to prove that he couldn't be father of this child, that he made this offer prior to the broadcast of the programme. I don't see that in the papers that I've looked at.
No, well, if you look at the transcript of the transcript that's in fact annexed to the statement of claim, you'll see it's there. Through the Minhill missionaries, he made it clear before the programme was broadcast that he would undergo a paternity test. It's not in the written correspondence, but it's clear. It's in fact mentioned in the programme that he was prepared to do that.
Did you at any stage inquire of RTE why, given the fact that Kevin Reynolds had offered to do a paternity test, that didn't alert them to a problem here and caused them to stay their hand?
Well, you see, by the time I got involved, the broadcast had in fact gone on air. But I'm somewhat surprised that, I suppose, in a sense, RTE didn't capitulate earlier. But I mean, the problem with RTE is that they kept referring to this independent third-party source that was, insofar as they were concerned, utterly reliable, and that they were prepared to believe that source and to stand over the truth of what they had alleged. In circumstances where, I mean, Father Reynolds had protested his innocence in the most strident terms and had offered to undergo a paternity test. I mean, that to me was extraordinary. And if you also look at the correspondence, the notion that solicitors would be writing into RTE and, solicitors wouldn't be replying, I mean, that I found extraordinary.
Yes, you have said that you're going to pursue an action now to discover who the sources, who were the sources for this information. Have you instituted any proceedings as yet, and what would be the nature of those proceedings? No,
I have said, but I've said on record, if I get instructions to do that, I will. But I would be very, very curious to find out who is the person, who is this loose cannon out there who could make such, appalling allegations against an individual and seek to hide behind some kind of anonymity. I mean, I would be very, very curious to know who that person is. And I believe that if we were to institute proceedings, I think the law would be on my side to ascertain the identity of that person. I don't think that RTE can simply say that that's journalistic privilege or anything like that.
Robert, thank you for joining us. Patsy McGarry, in the Irish Times this morning, you urged Pat Rabitte to institute an independent inquiry, and he's done that at your behest. You must be pleased.
Well, Vincent, I doubt very much if it was at my behest. I'm sure there are other factors involved. A lot of concerns have been expressed about the way this case has been handled by RTE over the weekend, particularly since the settlement last Thursday. Some very, very vociferous comment, not least by Noel Whelan in our own paper last Saturday. It was beginning to die down. I felt that in my own role I should say something. I wasn't in the office last week because if I didn't anyhow, people might suspect that being religious affairs correspondent of the Irish Times, I would be only too happy to see the church or a priest being bashed, which is not the case. So I suggested yesterday to the relevant people in the paper that I write something on the matter. They agreed. I did. At the end of it, at the beginning and the end of it, I called on Minister Rabitte to institute an independent inquiry into the matter. I suggested that it be senior counsel, that it be an inquiry in the lines conducted by Frank Callanan into the deaths of 3 Irish soldiers in Lebanon in March of 1989, which began in April of this year and was concluded by September of this year. And I felt this would be an even less complex case, so it could be done faster. Anyhow, he's asked the BAI to do that inquiry. It's a new territory for them, it's new territory for all of us, and it'll be interesting to see how they
may ask a senior counsel.
They may, which probably would be the wisest thing to do.
Frank Callanan was the senior counsel involved in this case, acting for Kevin Reynolds,
I wasn't aware of that,
as it happened.
Yeah.
Were you surprised at the announcement by somebody in the RTE Communications office on Friday evening when asked if there would be resignations? He said, rolled heads don't learn anything.
Vincent, I listened to that interview with Mary Wilson on Drive Time. I was absolutely shocked by the demeanour of the man concerned, considering he himself had been a very prominent and effective journalist. I'm talking about Kevin Dawson. Now, he has a role, a different role to play, but I felt that the stance by RTE, which he reflected, was utterly inappropriate to the gravity of what they had conceded had happened, that it had to be properly investigated. We're long beyond the days when any institution can be trusted to investigate itself, whether it be media or any other institution, banks, church, politics. We've so many examples now at this stage in our own society that even RTE must have concluded themselves an internal inquiry, or two in their case, would not meet the public demand.
It would seem that there's been no statement at all from the RTE authority in regard to this, and the indications are the RTE authority, as is usual for it, has played dead.
Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary, and it must be extremely damaging to RTE that has acted as the guardian that has acted as the guardian of the guardians, that when it comes to themselves that they're completely unwilling to fess up and put their hands up. If you don't mind me saying so though, I think Kevin Reynolds is a very, very lucky man in this regard, that he was accused of fathering a child and not of rape alone. Because if he had been accused of rape alone, my guess is that we wouldn't be sitting here now, because he had a scientifically verifiable way of proving his innocence. And if it had been rape alone, it would have been one person's word against the other. He would have been just as innocent as he is today, and he would have had no possibility of proving it. And that's really, you have to ask yourself how that state of affairs came about, that it's priest and nuns guilty as charged. How did that happen? The Ione Institute did research on what the public think is the rate of abuse among priests, and it's really scary reading, Vincent. 70% of people overestimate it. 70% of people overestimate the rate of abuse by clergy. 42% think that 1 in 5 priests are actually abusers. There's 5% who think over 90% of priests are abusers. And as we know, the only Irish figures we have are ones you talk about regularly, the Savay report. And then we have American figures, and they're between 3 and 4% of sexual abuse is carried out by clergy. So you have a vast overestimation. And you have to ask yourself, where does that come from? What's the climate that creates that? Because they're not learning, people in the public aren't learning that from personal experience. They don't know of, if you know 20 priests, which is not unusual in Ireland, 4 of them aren't child abusers. So why do 42% of people think that they are? And I think there has been a climate which is built up because, first of all, it was so shocking that clergy would abuse at all. Then the church handled it so badly and were so poor at dealing with it themselves. But now it has got... That
hardly captures it now, but anyway, go on.
Okay, whatever terms, I'll agree with them. Disastrous, awful, appalling.
Yeah, but they were complicit and they covered it up.
Yeah, no argument, Vincent.
Yeah, the institution covered it up.
Yeah.
But what is singularly... the issue with the Catholic Church with regard to all this is not so much the incidence of abuse as you say, the number of priests who abuse is very low. But no other institution has engaged itself in a comprehensive cover-up of this criminality. I would agree with you that there has been a cover-up. I think there has also been no acknowledgement that these things happen in other sectors of society. The point I was going to make was that as time has gone by, even Maeve Lewis of 1 in 4 has said that there's been a disproportionate amount of attention paid to clerical abuse, to the detriment of the vast majority of people who have not been abused by clergy. And that atmosphere... have been abused otherwise.
Yes, I beg your pardon. Who've been abused by people who are not clergy, which is the vast majority. That has led to a climate where this kind of thing can happen. And that's not just a question for RTE. Like, bashing RTE is a grand old hobby, but it's a question for the media in general, it's a question for civil society, and it's a question for all of us where